From Los Angeles, California, welcome to CG Society. I'm your host, Travis Borbeau, and today we'll be speaking with Ian Joyner, concept artist for film and games. And today's topic is going to be covering portfolios. To begin with, I think, Ian, let's go ahead and jump into some of your industry experience and your background.
All right. Can you guys all hear me? Does it sound okay on your end, Travis?
Sounds good.
Excellent. Okay. So yeah, my industry experience, I've been working for, I think, over 15 years now. I started off as a character modeler at Blur Studios, actually, was my first really big job. Worked there for about 3 years and continued in the character modeling field, but always kind of had a draw toward concept. So I started doing a lot of 3D concept maquettes, I guess you'd call them. There wasn't a lot of texture or coloring, but I was doing a lot of just design work just through sculpture. Eventually, I ended up going to Legacy Effects or Stan Winston Studios at the time, where I met a guy named Scott Patton, who was a good friend of mine, and we kind of, he showed me the beauty of doing design in 3D and how just blazingly fast you could do stuff, and it really kind of ignited something in me. So I worked there for about 6 years, developing new techniques, figuring out everything from 3D printing to just concepting in 3D, doing stuff in 2D, working mostly for practical effects. So what we were doing was going to be turned into puppets or makeups or maquettes, whatever it was going to end up being. But sometimes it would go digital as well. And while I was there, I got to work pretty close with a lot of art departments, and I discovered I had a real love for that side of the industry. So after about 6 years, I left Legacy and just kind of started joining art departments in the costume departments or whatever they would need me for. I primarily am known as kind of a creature guy, I think, but I do a lot of costume work as well. I went to Marvel for a long time. I was there for about 2 years, which was just an incredible experience working on these really just fun and always so entertaining movies. It was, as a comic fan, my entire life, it was kind of a dream come true. And I recently left there and have gone off to work for a new place, which I don't think I'm allowed to talk about, so I'm going to keep it quiet. But also very, very cool and very, very fun. And it's something I actually worked on a long time ago and I've been able to kind of revisit, which is exciting. So anyway, yeah, it's been a really great career, great life in the movie industry for me. It's been a lot of fun, and I know a lot of the people here are kind of starting their careers, or maybe they're been in for a while and kind of want to maybe break out of games and work into film, or maybe break out of film, work into games, or just work on anything. I've kind of worked on a little bit of everything, although if I'm being honest, the past probably 6-7 years, I've really just done film or TV.
I also think something interesting for you is that while the majority of artists are going from 2D to 3D, you started primarily on that path of 3D and now are doing much more 2D work.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I originally, I considered myself an illustrator and graphic designer before I went to character modeling. And I fell so in love with 3D that I stopped drawing altogether for, I mean, honestly, 10 years. I don't think I picked up a pencil and paper other than to draw, a funny picture of a friend or something.
And I want to clarify. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to also just clarify for people that may not understand, especially junior artists or students coming up, what it is specifically you do as a 3D modeler as opposed to just being a standard 3D modeler. Like what makes your position unique?
So originally, as a 3D modeler, what that would mean is I would be handed a concept. It could be very rough. It could be very refined. And at Blur, I work with some of the most amazing artists there, doing realistic stuff, doing cartoony stuff. It was an amazing place to work as a young artist too, because I was thrown into the fire to do, hey, make as close to a photoreal human as you can. This is back in like 2002, 2003, which was kind of difficult to do. Right. Or work on this cool superhero project, or hey, we're doing a commercial for Go-Gurt. You just never knew what it was going to be. So I was forced to jump around styles, and it was in doing stuff in 3D with the occasional texturing, maybe a little Photoshop just to kind of help sell the character look, but that was about it. So there, I was really working on specific look. So something, maybe it'd be a photo of like a rhino or of a dinosaur or something that I was trying to match. But then after a while, I really kind of realized that's not where my passion lay. Some people love doing that. Some people love taking that stuff and taking it to the next level. And it's a super important skill to have and a super useful and needed skill. But it was something my passion didn't really lie there. I loved being able to work, especially when I got to work with artists like Sean McNally or some of the other guys there who love to kind of like bounce back and forth, and they do paint overs over a model. We'd grow stuff and just discover new things in the process. And I found that very exciting, and didn't really know what that meant at first. And many years later, kind of started to discover like, oh, I think what I really like doing is the concept phase. So when I went to when I first left there, I was working a lot in games and stuff, and I would take, maybe they'd have a loose pencil illustration, or maybe they'd have nothing, just a description. And I would do quick ZBrush sculptures to kind of sell the idea. Whatever it was going to be. Maybe it was a monster, maybe it was a costume. And truth be told, this was, 13 years ago. I had no idea what I was doing. I don't think the job existed per se. Well, at that point, a lot of stuff was still being like scanned off of maquettes.
Right.
But I just felt, whenever I had to do that, I always felt like, boy, this doesn't seem like always the best way to go. I mean, there's amazing artists that you can work with doing this, but sometimes they just don't have the budgets or the time. So I really thought there was something there with ZBrush, especially that software had just been taken over the market. And I just realized, I think that there is something here where it doesn't just have to be a end result tool. It could be an early tool. And I mentioned Scott earlier because I really credit him a lot with when I went to Legacy. I actually did some concept work, mostly in like Photoshop and some rough 3D. But a lot of it was like really rough 3D, and then I'd do some painting on top. And I was working on Iron Man 2 there. It was my first big movie. And I was working with Ryan Meinerjing from Marvel Studios. So who knew, many years later I'd get to work with him again in the Viz Dev department. But at the time, I worked really close with him because he had these beautiful illustrations, and he's very 3D savvy. So I would work in 3D and show him things, and he would do paint overs, and it was really fun. And a really just education on form and on design, really working on those suits. I worked on the Mark IV, 5, 6, and War Machine, and some of the drones. And although they had illustrations done, there was a lot to resolve and a lot to solve in 3D. So working with Ryan at that level was a real blessing. I mean, the guy has, if anyone here knows his work, he's just a phenomenal talent.
So what's your time frame like when you're jumping into concept? Or I know your time frame now, but
we went on a little bit of a tangent there. But after I finished Iron Man, they kept me on as an artist. But I really wanted to go into concept, and I saw what Scott was doing in ZBrush and Photoshop. At the time, Keyshot didn't exist, so we were doing everything in there. And his work was beautiful, and it was also done so very quickly. And I got thrown on a pitch for BioShock. And in the time it took me to model out a rough model, render it in 3D Studio Max, do some Photoshop work, that I kind of was like, hey, this isn't bad. Scott had done like 5 or 6 versions that were like drastically different. And I went, wait a minute. How did you do that? And we had he kind of took me under his wing in a lot of ways and showed me his process, and we kind of bonded over that, and started. Then all of a sudden, if I discovered something, I'd show him. And it was really a cool work environment at that level. So but at that time I was very, very based in 3D. But all of a sudden, I was kind of doing what I was doing as a modeler, but trying to do it in the time frames that someone could paint or draw these things, which is really, really difficult. And in fact, it's pretty much impossible if you try to approach it from production. So it was starting to learn about what really matters, and what phase do you need to really resolve every little pimple on the butt, and what phase do you need to just, here's the broad strokes. And so like in terms of time frames, like nowadays we do stuff, even then we're doing stuff in a day. What can you do in a day? How many images can you get done? How many versions? Travis and I were talking earlier about iterations. Like, it's not always just the final image you see. Oftentimes it's I did 20 different versions of this character before you see one that the director even kind of likes. I've always kind of thought concept art is more about showing people what they don't want. and then eventually showing them what they do want.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, and if you can go into it with that mindset, it's not it's a very healthy way to look at it.
Now, before we get too far beyond one of the comments you made, I wanted to pause you real quick, just because I think there was something important you said that is good for students to pick up, or good for junior artists to pick up, which is you if you're doing 3D concept and you're showing a director a 3/4 pose, you're not going to waste a lot of time modeling the back of that character unless somebody's going to see the back of that character. Is that what you mean when you say you're not going to waste time rendering out every pimple, or do you still fully realize that character altogether?
No. Now, there are guys out there who work insanely fast, and they will resolve every little beat on it before when they do their renders. I jokingly and half proudly say I'm kind of lazy when it comes to that stuff. Like, you'll see on my early stuff, a lot of times things are hidden by smoke or by shadow. That means I didn't have time to think about that. For example, I think this little guy here, this was a design for, actually I did more on this than I thought. This was a design for the aliens in Thor. There was kind of this gag where they bump into this big guy wearing a mask, and they take off the mask, and he's this big monster, scary monster guy. So there was a few different versions of these guys. But like, these were quick. These two versions were done, I think, in a day, maybe 2 days.
Wow.
Yeah, they're really, really quick turnarounds on this stuff. That's kind of, there's versions in between sometimes that I won't show. But then you've got guys like this, and I haven't uploaded all the images I've done for these guys. I was on the Demons of Thor for months and months and months. And I've got these are close to the final ones, but in the art of book, you'll see so many versions. I mean, what do they look like with ashy skin? What do they look like with this burnt lava skin? What do they look like? Big crazy horns? What do they look like with these weird bird faces? Or maybe a more traditional demon. Maybe it's more of a kind of a tourist take. We went all over the place with those guys. And it was months and months just working on these characters, and there were versions of them. So it wasn't just like one final epic, awesome take on these guys. In fact, if I go to this one,
you were literally building an army.
Literally building armies. You can see here they were like burning corpses with these giant guards, which were really fun to work on. The storyboard artist had done this great illustration of this bird-headed creature. I wish I had the other ones uploaded too, but we explored that for a long time. Like, maybe they're literally like, there's a helmet that looks like a bird skull, or maybe it's actually a flaming chicken head, or whatever it's going to be. Because when we were working on Thor, we didn't really know early on just what the tone of the movie was. It's called Ragnarok, so we're thinking, is it the end of the world? We also knew that Taika was a phenomenal comedy director. Was it going to be kind of funny? Was it, who knew early on?
Right.
So we were exploring all sorts of takes on these things. Another one that I was on for a long time was the dragon. I only really have the final versions here, but if you guys have the art of book, you'll see just all sorts of different takes on these giant wings and things. The funny thing is, we explored this, and I was on this one again for months and months of different takes. Very rough sculptures. Like, these are toward the final, but eventually, what they realized is, like, this scene right here. I don't know if there's a delay right now or not, but this scene that showed up right here should be the severed head of the dragon. And
sure.
What this was the important thing. The rest of it didn't really matter. The dragon could have almost been anything, but what had to play is that, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Thor, shame on you. It's been out for 6 months. But when the dragon goes to this portal, its head gets severed and skids across, and there's goo everywhere, sliming all over the place, and its tongue just flops out. Kind of a comedy moment. So what we ended up doing is, after we did all this exploration, we reverse engineered. I did this image first, which Taika liked, then started to explore toward the final here. And like we were saying before about iterations, I've eventually I'll post more and more stuff just as I have the time. But these are close to the final approved images that kind of sold the design, and then it was sent off to effects companies. But these aren't like what you're going to do in a day. I think these, many iterations led to what these things became.
Now, do you block these off? If you were starting out in a portfolio and this was your first gig, you made a really great comment, which I like. Dave and I talked yesterday, and you and I talked today about the iterations and about the ability to kind of see an artist's thought process or direction or depth as far as design IQ by seeing the same character iterated over and over. If you were starting out today and that's the first project you're on and you're putting these into a portfolio, as you mentioned, a lot of times you're actually concepting knowing that the director is going to say no and not like it. And the more no's and the more unlikes you get, the faster you're able to focus in on what they do like. How do you distinguish those in your portfolio, or do you? Do you just drop them all in and say, here's all the variations? Or do you say...
Well, here's one of the things with portfolios. If you're working film, I don't know if games are really like this so much. I think once the games are out, they're a little freer. We sign really extensive NDAs, and you have to be careful what you show.
Right.
Generally, movies out, if it's a version of the character, I always wait until either the DVD has been released or I get permission from like a production designer, because you don't want to show something and then find out, oh, we were saving that for the sequel. Or, hey, we might want to use that again. Or we're making an art book or whatever it's going to be. Every artist I know has come up against that, where they show something they're excited about and then they get told, you take that down right now, because they don't want to show the process stuff. So generally I show stuff that's closer to final or has been published or I get permission for. One of the nice things while at Marvel, though, is that they do these extensive and beautiful art books. And in those art books, they like to show versions. They like to show the stuff. I worked on a character for Guardians of the Galaxy called Martin X, and I'll show you some versions of him. These were some of my first ones, and these weren't in the art book, but I did get permission to show them. So this was just some of my studies of like how fractal and how broken up what a crystal man should look. You know, how transparent, how opaque. I had this idea for these kind of glowing, moving crystal eyes that were inside, which there was elements that they liked and elements they didn't like. And this was trying to be a little closer to the actor, Michael Rosenbaum. So those were some early versions I did, but they were like just enough that I got to move on to the next round. Now what I'm going to show you here this is not the next version. This is probably the 20th version after all of that. But this was very close to the final that got picked. It was a kind of a blend of this one and this one. And these were sent to the VFX company. And because I work in 3D, I was able to send them some rough models that could help kind of show what this thing was. But as you can see, like, the head is what mattered. So I just kind of did a quick sketch based on what we knew the costume was, over using a little bit of photo, doing a little bit of paint over. Just, it didn't matter really. What mattered was the face design.
Now, quick question for you on a character like this. 10 years ago, it may have still been the question of whether that's going to be practical effects or whether it's going to be digital.
Sure.
I'm assuming when you're working on this character right now, it's a guarantee that that's going to be CG.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no doubt in my mind. In fact, when I had jumped on it, they'd already filmed all the scenes with the guy with the dots on his head.
Oh, really?
Yep. Now, on that end, they added a few characters toward the end. This guy was really fun to work on. And I did a lot of versions of him, too, and some other artists did some just phenomenal, cool takes on him, where he was really creepy and weird. And I did a lot of versions of him, too. These are just some of the final ones that led to send to the VFX company, who then take it further. You know, when you're done, it's not really done. You know, the next company, the next person is going to take it and resolve it even further. But this guy was really just a blast to work on, kind of weird alien Doctor Strange with the Ravagers kind of stuff. So yeah, like these ones, we fully knew they were going to be CG characters. They were already done. Oh yeah, sorry.
No, I keep cutting you off. I apologize. Can you click on that so we can zoom in on him a little, or is that?
I don't know how high res I went.
Oh, okay. Never mind. We'll just go on it. That's a great character. The texture on the rubber and the leather type stuff on there is just great.
Yeah, it holds up at this. They actually are very high res images. When I upload to online, I never go very high res. We were talking about this earlier because there's certain ne'er-do-wells out there who will sell your work coffee mugs or whatever the heck they're going to do. I don't know. Like I don't want to just ramble on and on about my stuff. I think it's more about looking at the students' work. Yeah,
that's fine. I know you're limited on time too. So if there's any last image here that you want to show from your portfolio that really represents who you are right now, or what you're doing, or where you want to go.
I am right now. Where's the one that's falling asleep? That would be no. I think if anything, you're talking about making a portfolio. This image is very, very old. but it's also, I think, one of my most successful in terms of I've gotten work off of this image. If you really think about it, it's not a very descriptive image. It's a very front-on view of this character from the Amazing Spider-Man. But because of the dramatic lighting and everything else on it, this was the image that I was able to kind of get final approval for the character on. And then we did a bunch of other stuff on it. But I've got this image really like kind of has been a standout for me, and I kind of, you know, I've shown it a lot because of that. And it's because it's a striking image as opposed to some of the more clinical stuff, which I will try to show now real quick.
And how old would you say this image here is?
Boy, I don't know. When did that movie come out? 2010? 2011?
So it's about 7-8 years old?
Yeah, about. And that was done just in ZBrush and painting. Like, I didn't have key shots, so all the dramatic lighting you see on there was like, I had to fake it. In fact, all these images that you're just looking at now, these are all done in just ZBrush illustrations. This is before I knew what keyshot even was. This is for Jurassic World, but I do have some iterations on here. Like the first images I did were actually in this kind of hazy light, which I just thought looked interesting. And I said, well, it might be a nighttime scene, so I had to take it and turn it into a nighttime scene. And then I said, actually, it's going to be a bright daylight scene. And at that point, we had to so, you know, you're okay, great. And I have so many images of these guys flying. These are some of the few that I think are okay, you know, show. But here's some iteration in terms of like early design work, and then figuring out what does that mean. Like, is it at this point he had these snaggly teeth, and like, what does the crest look like? What are the teeth? Does it have lips? Does it go over the lips? Is it more narrow? Does it have and we looked at skeletal structures for these guys, but there's only so much you know. I mean, you look at the Jurassic Park dinosaurs, and yes, they're based on fact, and no, they're not. They're also really they're characters, right? Like
right.
A lot of invention by like Crash and the guys back in the day to make those things look so iconic. So when we're doing this, it was kind of the same thing, looking at the skeletal structures and then figuring out what we need for the movie. So once these were kind of rough sculptures I did Photoshop over, and then these were, once it was more resolved, I did a bunch of stuff. These are just ZBrush renders of different snouts, different teeth. But yeah, I mean, these are just a small example of some of the iterations and the not so like striking work, right? Like this is 90% of the job, I think, when you're just showing maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's this. And it doesn't always matter that you have like the most beautiful image. Really what matters is, are you solving the production's problems, and are you thinking about what the needs are? And a lot of times that's what the job comes down to. But sometimes it is about making cool, fun images too. So.
What I love about how you have that displayed with the ABCD is that it becomes very clear that this is production work, right? That you're showing iterations and that you put together. Now, one more question on timing. And this is always going to be different, I think, with every artist that I bring in. With students, you know, one of my biggest pieces of advice is, you know, if you've got anything that's more than 9 months old, chances are as a student, you've grown beyond that now. So probably pull it off. Right. But then, you know, you're where you are, or you're at that level where you've been in the industry for 5, 10, 15 years, and you may not want to pull that movie off that's 7 or 8 years old. However, how much work are you going to show from 7 or 8 years ago as a professional? Are you going to show everything from an old film, or do you limit that?
No, I mean, I feel I had a lot of growth recently, which was kind of surprising because, you know, you get set in your ways when you're working. You don't get to explore as much as you think, and you're oftentimes under the gun. So you're just doing what you know, doing it quick, and doing it as well as you can. But I had before my first daughter was born, I had kind of she's about 4 years old now. I had this basically about 5 years, maybe 6 years ago, when we knew we were going to go into the kid thing. I had this kind of epiphany of like, I'm not where I want to be. I don't like the work I'm doing. I actually really hate most of the work I'm doing, and I don't show a lot of that work. Some of it's okay, and some of it's not great. Some of it's just downright terrible. But I had this kind of epiphany of like, I need to evolve my work. And I started looking at the artists that I really loved, and trying to figure out what do I like about their work, and what makes it successful to me. And I started realizing like where 3D fails is a lot of times it's so clinical, and you see every little thing that it has no mood and it has no emotion. And I started to go, well, I can't rely on 3D anymore. I need to go double down on my painting skills, on my photo bashing skills, on anything that is going to break what I've heard it referred to, and I refer to it myself as the CG stink. And I wouldn't be surprised if Scott Patton actually coined that one. But yeah, a lot of times when you do this stuff in 3D, it just has this feel of like, yeah, it's a model. Great, okay, got it. And there's no mood to it. There's no emotion to it. And so I've been, and I still am trying to find my voice as an artist. And I have a skill set in 3D that I don't think I'll ever want to abandon. At the same time, I have a love of painting that I just think, in a lot of ways, that the 2D work is almost more effective. But when you combine the two, I think you start really getting some interesting results.
Right.
And so though I'll still do a lot of, let's see if I have, I might have some really rough sketches. These are like thumbnails to show a client like, oh yeah, here's maybe what we'll do for this thing. Well, these are tiny little sketches that I just took a quick snapshot of to put on here. They're not beautiful images. This was the next thing I showed him. And this was really quick. But a lot of this is like this is the renders I did. I did a shiny render, a skin render of a very kind of hairless cat-looking fairy. I did a little ambient occlusion thing, and then I comped them together, and I did all this stuff in 2D to kind of really quickly show where this might go. So like if you look like the hands, there's nothing going on there. I did a little bit of work on the hands, a little bit on the feathers, and this and that. There's no wings. I did all that, and then once it got picked and everything, then I had to do this like front and back thing so that they could build it into the effects. And I found that by working very quickly in 3D and then just jumping right into Photoshop, I could get the result I wanted to sell the idea much, much faster than if I was trying to model wings and feathers and texture and do all that stuff.
Right. Can we go back to your drawing for just 1 second? Because I think that's an important point to pause on. I think you pretty much touched it, but we've had this discussion before too, which is that drawing in film or drawing in the art department is often much more of a communication tool to just quickly problem solve or get a point across of where you want to go.
This was literally done on a Skype call with them.
Really?
I was on some did some different versions, and I just jumped right into 3D on these guys, and they liked them, but they just weren't really hitting the notes. They're too scary. They weren't really kind of funny. They're pretty. So I did this was a really, really ugly, rough 3D model that I painted over. If I ever showed it, you'd be like, "What? How did that even?" Like total different shapes on most of it. So this was like the first version I showed him. He's like, "That's interesting." I took it this way, and they realized, you know what? That's it's too insect, too scary. And then jumped into these guys, which is a more humanoid. So I did some took that body that I had roughed out, posed it different, rendered it into different lighting conditions, and then just jumped into Photoshop on it to show some different versions of it. This is all very, very fast on weekends and stuff. I was working on Marvel at the time, didn't have much time to do things.
Right.
And then eventually he's like, I like that, but and he actually Andrew's the one who mentioned the hairless cat and the really iridescent feathers. And when we so I started
to see it now.
I just started. What's that?
I said you can see the hairless cat now that you mention it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, no, it's absolutely that. So I was just, and he said he really wanted to be kind of sympathetic and almost a little bit sad. So I drew this thing while I was talking to him and just kind of showed it like, maybe like this. He's like, yeah, like that could totally work with the weird little feathers and things like that. So once I had this little sketch, I was pretty quick to make an ugly little model and make this thing that was kind of pretty, kind of ugly. That was kind of the vibe we were going for. And that's the job. Sometimes you have a lot of time, sometimes you have no time. But I'm glad. Two things I'm glad about is that though I'm not really a great just like pencil artist or anything, I've got just enough skill to tell people, to show people what I might be thinking. And I'm also glad that I spent my time as a modeler because it's opened up a lot of things for me when I do, especially hard surface things. Where I can do a little fancier stuff than if I was just trying to sculpt it all. But anyway, I've been rambling a lot of time, so we should probably jump into.
Yeah, let's jump into gallery to get these picked out fairly quick. Thanks for taking the time to spend with us.
Yeah, and if anyone has any questions or anything, I'll stick around for a minute to answer if I can. So yeah, so let's just, I guess this is the 3D one, I believe. Now, how does this work? Are you going to pick some? I'm going to pick some, or am I just?
No, we're going to go. We call it Pro Select, and what this really is about is, every day there's a wall of art. Every day I go through every entry on CG Society, and I'm always looking for up and coming artists or artists that we can kind of reach back and give a hand to. So, with Pro Select, I'd like to try to do both. I'd like to try to find, some artists that are representing their work really well, really professionally, and don't really need a lot of help. Just rather, hey, good job, keep going. And then also, are there artists that are close, that, are right there on the edge of having a really great portfolio piece, and this is not in a derogatory way to say, oh, you're not good enough or this needs to be better. It's rather, as one pro to another pro, can we take each other's art the way that you and I used to do? Can you take each other's art and really just fight to find that thing wrong with it in a constructive way? My hope is that people will receive this well. But if we're going to call these portfolio sites, I really think that we should be pushing them more towards a portfolio site, which, in regards to traffic for a site will hurt it because it means people are uploading less art and being more selective. But I would like to help people further along that way. So at whatever level, if you can pick, anywhere between 2 and 4 images, and we can just take a look at those and see what you think based off what images kind of pop out to you. And
sure. Like when I jump into this is the 3D one, I was looking at this one with the CG choice, but I think that they're already CG choice. Let's not look at that. Let's look at the just posted. So I'll do something from 3D and 2D because the way I work is kind of in between.
Yeah.
So first off, I mean, there's just so much beautiful artwork out there. It's staggering. I'm sure as a beginning artist, it's even more terrifying. I know I go on these pages and I just go, wow, there is so much talent out there. So let's see what grabs my eye. I'm gonna try to look at it as a design point, and this is kind of from I'm gonna be looking at 3D and I'll look at 2D. I mean, just going through here. It's all so cool. I don't know.
And we can scroll. You can scroll all the way to the bottom. It doesn't matter. There is no bottom.
Down. I mean, people they're getting looked at. Let's go way down. So yeah, it's hard for me to look at 3D stuff sometimes because this is a great Unreal version of Grip Hook or whatever his name is from Harry Potter. That's neat. Cool. If I'm looking at it from a design point, I'm gonna try to find something that looks a little more, a little bit more like they're inventing something in 3D, which can be hard to do. I know I might pick something that's already been oh, I did this off of someone's concept, but let's take a look at this guy. I do a lot of creatures, so this one is it's a cool creature. It's got a lot of interest stuff going on with it. If I was going to critique it, which sure, why not? That's how we're rolling, right? I can pick an image and give it some critique.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're looking to help people with imagery. This is Oscar.
If I'm looking at this image here, it's a cool creature. The image is a little confusing though. If I first look at this, my first read of it is that it almost looks like it's got one head merging in here, and that there maybe is some behind it. So and then it gets a little bit boring in the anatomy. So if I'm going to give this thing a critique, I would say you got to find an angle that really sells your 3D design. That can be the hardest thing because you're posing it, and then you got to find a camera angle that's going to make it more exciting. So in this thing, I think what's really important is showing how these 3 heads connect into the body, and showing that it's one continuous creature. So I think there's 2 ways to go about it, and it might be a multiple image thing to really sell this design. Would be one from the side, with a really dynamic pose, maybe one head's rearing up, its body has a little bit more contrapposto, it's a little more tilted, and really showing how these 3 heads would interact. Because just from this angle, it just gets a little muddled in this area. And it can be really hard on a complex creature. The other thing is, and I'm very guilty of this, so take this with a grain of salt, exciting dramatic pose on the head, pretty much a T-pose on the body. So it gets really flat and boring when these legs are they're basically just doing the same thing. The tail is not, there's nothing dramatic happening here. But if you look at nature photography of a lion on the hunt, or monitor lizards, display of a mating ritual or something, there's a lot more action happening in the body. And I think if I was going to say anything, especially when you're doing stuff in 3D, posing is king, and posing can kill your design. Like sometimes you just show a flat up, ortho model, and you won't get approved because it's so just dull looking. But you turn the head, you add a little bit of twist to the shoulder, and all that, and a little bit more dramatic lighting, and they're like, "Oh, I love it." It's like it's the same design. It's just.
Is it fair to say that the last 20% takes 80% of the time? I mean, one of the things I always kind of want to reach in and grab artists with is that, especially when you're working in 3D like this, is that you've done so much of the work. And as you mentioned, you've got the illustrative side of it. Show me the problem solving side. You've got the model. You can give me a side view. You can give me a top view. You can show me some of those more boring views, like after you give me the sexy shot. And I feel like so many artists are taking away from their own work. And I'm not sure, as a modeler, I don't model anymore, but as a person with a previous position as a modeler, I understand wanting to get done with the model, that the excitement wears off and that you're ready to move on. But I feel like if you can hang on and push it for that last 20% and take that 80% of the time to do it, you're going to get so much more mileage from it. So
and I think it's really easy. Like you hit that point of being too precious. I mean, I look at this and I don't know how much is photo and how much is sculpted. It looks like a lot of it's sculpted, but it's also pretty much the same thing over the whole thing, right? Like it's that to that to that. It all kind of has the same vibe. And when we look at animals, and for creature design, I think the biggest thing I could say is like look to nature. Nature wins. Nature beats us all the time. No matter how creative you think you are, nature's done something cool. And I have yet to see, maybe you could say like the xenomorph, or maybe you could say the, some Barlow stuff or something like that. But like, even then, nature is so much more imaginative than we, in terms of problem solving, than we can imagine. And sometimes you look at like a microorganism, and like, if I'm really going to get nitpicky on this beyond the pose, like these little proto feather spike things sticking out, they're just kind of randomly, haphazardly sticking out. And if we look at nature, there's usually a little bit more control on that. Like, what are these for? Are they sharp? Are they just proto feathers? Maybe some are broken off after a while. Like maybe you show some damage of these things that have it looks like an old creature. So tell a story with your image, more than just like. And that could be hard. I get it. So what I do is I don't consider myself a modeler anymore. I get the model to a point, and I jump into Photoshop and I do all that stuff. Because if nothing else, the worst thing you can do as a 3D concept artist is noodle over your one design for so long, and then they go, "Oh, the meeting from Friday? Yeah, it's on Wednesday now." Oh, great! I have nothing to show. Right. So like when I was doing those Martinex designs, the crystal guy, that's why those were just standard. I didn't pose them or anything. Just found a little 3/4 angle, rendered them out, took them in Photoshop. Those were as I was going, iterating, and I would just take them in Photoshop and do some stuff, and then the next one. And it could be seen as a waste of time, but if you're looking at it as a design point, that's what's so important, is taking the time to show your process. And the client might never see the work that you show. I'm going to start being better about showing more of the 2D stuff. I barely show my sketches, but I sketch all the time.
Right.
So most of them are really bad because it doesn't matter. I'm just doing it for myself. And I'm kind of getting over my pride and just saying, like, you know what, they're bad, it's fine. But it does show a little bit of your thought process. And that's just that's kind of a tangent on what we're talking about here.
That's a good tangent.
But like, yeah, because you've got this down here, and I haven't read what it says here. It looks like this was the initial idea with the 3 heads. I think it's really cool. I think there's a lot of stuff. Honestly, though, there's something more interesting in the spikes, right? Like it's got this weird like frilling effect with the spikes that if you're going to translate this into your 3D design, like these became very dainty and small. So, sometimes even the roughest of sketches, if you really look at it, something gets captured in that you would never have done in 3D, because I guarantee doing this kind of spiky thing was going to be easier than figuring out this and what this really is. But I don't know. I look at this, I go, there's something really kind of fun. You could kind of start solving some interesting ideas with that. Also, like the striking red pattern on this.
Yeah, Oscar. Boy, I think if you get a total Samurai Jack vibe from his sketch, man. So good job, Oscar.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you pulled that in here, if you darkened his scale pattern down and then brought this red from these spikes and gave some beautiful form transition that really wrapped around it, this thing would go from like a cool dinosaur monster to like, whoa, that's really graphic and weird, and I want to see more of that. Even if you didn't change the pose, even if you just looked at these things of like, what are these striping patterns in this black? Like the graphic element of this that gets lost on this, because in 3D, I think we get precious about, well, I spent the time making the scales. Look at the scales. No one cares about the scales until they do. So
well, you just defined what we were talking about as drawing as a communication tool too, because no matter how rough or bad a drawing is, if you've got those ideas of stripes, if you've got those ideas of contrasting colors, if those can make it through to the final, a seasoned artist, an artist like yourself, any of the artists in our group would be able to look at that and be like, okay, I get the contrasty zebra stripey type thing. Let's see what that looks like, right?
Yeah, let's see what that is.
It doesn't have to be a 35-minute sketch that we all are impressed with how good you can draw. And I don't think young artists hear that enough, or artists in the studio. I think that 90% of artists in the studio would be afraid to show a drawing, period.
Well, I think because guys, he's a friend of mine, phenomenal talent who is in his 2D and his 3D. He just pops up right here. He might even have some 2D in here. I'm not going to critique him because he's brilliant. He's awesome. He does amazing stuff. But if you look at his work, you can see that he does rough sketches. He does finished things. And I think what happens is, and hell, I get intimidated. You see those sketches he does or anybody else does, and you go, oh, I don't want to show my 2D.
Oh, yeah, you work with Jared, you don't show drawings.
Yeah, when you finally do, it's like, oh, wow, I'm so glad I did, because that actually ended up being really useful. And I've been in meetings with directors who are not traditional artists. Actually, Taika on Thor is a really good artist. And then you get if you get the art of book, you'll see a lot of his sketches, and they're great, and they're brilliant, and they're really fun. And I think there's something about that that's like, are they the ones that are going to make it in the movie?
Yeah.
Maybe not, but they definitely birthed the stuff that's in the movie. And if you, even if it's a little cartoon, it's worth showing. It's worth having that skill and building that skill. I think if I had any big regret, it's that I didn't like keep those skills up. I kind of like abandoned them. So I guess I'll jump into this one, because I think I'm pretty sure I know this. This is a design I think he did of an Aquaman character. Honestly, this is, if I'm looking at this as in an art department, I wouldn't be surprised to see it in an art department. This could be an early version of a character. Now, when I look at this in terms of a costume design, without going into like the nitty gritty of like, well, what's this and this? The number one thing I think about, and this is the number one thing I see when I look at a costume design, is movement. This looks like something an actor is going to like. Yes.
Right.
And could an actor wear this? Now, here's the thing. When you're doing an early pass on a costume design, I think one of the worst things you can do is only think about that. It's almost like
too many speed bumps.
Make the graphic image that you want. Maybe there's a line going from the head all the way down to the tippy toes, and it looks beautiful. But when you really think about an actor wearing it, you have to break that up. There's going to be moments that don't work. So as you iterate and as it gets approved, that's when you start resolving that stuff. That being said, I think it's always a good idea when you're working on a design to think about like, boy, if my actor's wearing this and he tries to like, scratch his foot, how does this collapse? How is it going to work? How is this going to actually fold over things? And it might sound like a little bit like I'm picking at small things here, but it's actually a major thing. And it's going to come up in meetings. You're going to be asked about it. And you could be, well, I'd love to explore that more, and I have some ideas, and that could sometimes work. But it's better if you actually early on think about that. And if you can think about it early on and still give the graphic cool effect that you want, you're going to be a rock star on an art department team, because you're going to be the one who really thinks about these things. Now, and then on this one, if I wanted to get really nitpicky, we could go into this kind of stuff. But again, like I said, I will hide that stuff in shadow if I'm not ready to show it, or I'll mist it, or I'll pose them in a way you don't see it. This highlight right here draws attention to an area that's not finished. So as an artist, like, be aware of that.
Highlights are powerful, right?
Yeah. I mean, highlights are really powerful. Like, for me, this is the first thing I look at.
Well, and one of the things you're bringing up with this is really important. As I go through every night and I'm looking for people, character guys they're still pretty tough to find. I mean, there's a lot more talented artists putting work online than I think there was 15 years ago. Obviously, the level is just crazy. But one of the things that I still notice is that there are not enough people designing real world proportions for film, costume design for film. You know, even in models and character models, I think that everybody's learned the lesson with anatomy. Everybody knows now you got to know your anatomy. And I think we've taken the anatomy too far. I don't think you can take anatomy too far. But what I mean by that is that it's the first thing that artists run to educate themselves. And then they seem to get stuck in the anatomy rut where their anatomy becomes a 10 and their costume design is a 4. Their props are a 6 or a 5.
If you're doing creature design, you might get your anatomy is going to be important. If you're doing costume design, it almost doesn't matter. I mean, I hate to say that because, like, of course you want to have good anatomy and it's going to make you a better artist. When you're doing costume design, you're usually pretty buried. I mean, you're not going to see, unless you're doing some elegant dress or some barbarian character maybe. But yeah, generally when you're doing this costume design stuff, it could be about, you know, this is more of a model of Michael Jackson, but you look at, like, let's have really great anatomy. But look at his jacket back then. Like, it covers up everything. The whole point of it is that it changes his anatomy. And that could be the most striking thing on a costume design is that it literally breaks what we know as human anatomy. And all of a sudden you've got these shoulder pads sticking up or this collar. Now, that being said, working at Marvel was a masterclass for me. Working with guys like Andy Park, working with guys like Ryan, who I mentioned earlier. These guys, they know their anatomy. And the whole team is just so great. But they know their anatomy. They also know costume design in terms of that won't work. That won't sell. Like, if you're doing a female, I'm trying to find, maybe I should go into 2D, but if you're doing a female's costume, like, just the wrong line work on something, just the wrong patterning on something can make the girl stop the flow. It'll make her look dumpy, or it'll make her, and she could be the most stunning woman you've ever seen. Or you could take a super heroic guy and make him look, you know, like he's just out of shape, or like he's not ready to kick any butt, you know.
Right.
But with the right line work, suddenly a very simple image, something that you just do like a graphic pass on, is like, wow, that looks like a superhero. I've got the V shape, I've got the this, I've got the that. Anyway, do you want to do 4 altogether, or 4 from 3D, 4 from 2D?
No. We're gonna do 3 or 4 altogether, and let's just go 3 because you've spent almost a whole hour in here, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. So let's just pick 2 more real quick, and thank you for taking the time to share so much with us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna jump into the 2D side. One of the funny things with 2D is, like, how much of it these days is touched with 3D. And I mean, one thing to bring up is, like, if you're working in an art department and you don't know any 3D, you better be a really, really good 2D artist.
Right.
Because almost everybody does a touch of 3D. Even if they heavily paint over it, they know a little bit.
Right.
Looks cool.
One real quick, Ian. We're not going to go through a whole lot of questions, but Jose has a good one. Jose, glad to have you here. It says, when you say real world proportions, where do you cross the line saying muscular versus fat versus bony? What I'm talking about when I say real world proportions is, as I go through, and I'll pass this off to you, Ian, when I go through on a daily basis and I'm looking through character designers, what I'm looking for is not somebody who can easily, you know, throw hulking shoulders on and a tiny waist and a character that's 11 heads tall, but rather somebody, as Ian was pointing out, that can do something that feels just as cool on a character or actor that exists in the real world. You know, that's where, to me, films and games differ vastly, is that you can't get away with as much, but then again, I could eat my words with as much VFX and characters like the Hulk in movies. So
yeah, I mean, everything's touched these days. Now, here's an example. I'm just going to go really quick. I'll pick a few. This is a pretty real-world looking guy. Like, this looks like something you could make. The legs don't look too long. The body looks, everything on this looks pretty believable. I just randomly picked thumbnails. Now, this would be a very striking human being if you ever saw one. I'm guaranteeing that these legs would never be that long. So the trick in costume design would be, how do you cheat the eye, right? How do you make it feel like this? And a lot of times when you're doing a costume design, you actually do the overly done proportions, and then you backtrack into, like, what makes it real. But the worst you can do is sell a design that's completely fantasy, and then you get your actor cast, and it's all of a sudden like, oops, I can't really get that person to look that way. And I think everybody who worked in it has had that issue happen.
And when actors get cast for film, a lot of times they'll send over the shot of them in a bikini or a pair of swim trunks, and you'll see that, oh, we thought we were going to pick him or we were going to pick her, but she has really short calves. She has, or he has, really, really rounded shoulders, and we need the shoulders to be broader for the costume design. So those things actually come into play.
Another very common thing that happens on that stuff is you'll be working on a character with an actor, with a scan even. And then the actor goes, well, I'm going to be in a superhero movie. I better work out. And they get too buff, or they, whatever happens. Like, very rarely do they get like, oh, we put on weight. Usually it's the opposite. Like, they put on too much muscle, and now the suit has to get padded out even more. And this thing that like their skinny frame made it look perfect, now we have to figure out how to thin it up again. That happens a lot, especially with the superhero stuff. I'll just pick a random one. But yeah, I was looking for just some costume stuff, but it looks like there's a lot more creature. Nice colors. I like that. Very soft. But yeah, I don't know. There's so many out there. If anyone else has any questions, I'd be happy to answer it, or do my best to answer it.
And then let's see. Armando was here, but he left. Armando is a big fan. Says, good to hear. You talk about the CG stink. I've been working for similar voice and motion in my work. So I think Armando has something uploaded probably in the latest entries. Is that where you are now? Yes.
In latest, I'll try refresh.
So we're looking for an X-Men style character.
Jeez. X-Men.
I don't see it. So we'll have to get back to you, Armando. Post it up on my Facebook, and we'll take a look later.
I'll try to give you a thoughts.
And let's hit one last one for you, Ian. And it's 1:55 now, so let's hit one last one, and we'll let you go. Thanks for letting us hold you hostage.
Oh, just like one last image.
Oh, yeah.
If I want to go fully pro, David Levy is such a great example of that, like where he can do these beautiful sketches, he can do these beautiful photoreal paintings. And that guy is just a phenomenal talent. I'm trying to find one that's like a nice beginner, but like getting ready to be pro level, if you know what I mean.
Right on the edge, that more advanced.
We looked at a few of the other ones. It'd be cool to find somebody who's like just almost there. It's so hard to tell from the thumbnail, but
it is. And there's a lot of them, right? So.
There's so many of them.
And you can go into feature. Are you looking for 2D or 3D? You probably want to go into feature 2D, 3D, because those are people that are right in the middle. So the way that CG Society Gallery works for anybody listening is that everybody makes it into latest entries, and we have latest entries as kind of our premier gallery because we want people to be able to select on a daily basis. We want to show your most recent work. If your work is at the level that we take a look at it and it looks like you spent time on it and you put the hours in, it makes it into feature 2D and feature 3D. And from feature 2D and feature 3D, it gets selected for awards, meaning that we feel like you push this to your level as far as you can take it. And then we also now have community awards, which is basically just based off of a popularity contest on the fact that people are taking a look and liking your image, and that's picked by the community. So we want to have a couple different ways to do it. So feature 2D and feature 3D, I feel, is a good collection of students and intermediate and professional artists kind of mixed together, throwing up sketches.
How much is required? It is like, they're rocking it. They're doing great work. And something that I can tell is actually pro level work. In terms of like, I also kind of wanted to find something that was a little bit more in the concept phase rather than like a really tight finished model. But
right by the dragon bust below that, there's a couple little robot guys that are conceptual, but yeah, find something that you like. This is about you.
There's so much to see. I'm going blind. Let's see. It's also kind of fun to look at all this stuff. Yeah, like, what's a good look at? This one might be. Yeah, like this is a very nice sculpt. I think it's really close, but like what it needs is it needs to be pushed one way or the other almost. Like it's such beautiful color work and it's got some really cool things, but it also feel. It has that CG 3D feel to it. It doesn't really have the lighting's maybe a little too stark, or it just doesn't blend together in that way that could, you know, the real world has, or that a painting might have. I mean, it's a great sculpture. I think actually this is really interesting. All this stuff down here.
And just as a quick pass, like if you're taking this piece and you've got to get it ready for a meeting in 25 minutes, you know, are you dropping a haze layer over top of this? I mean, what are you doing to kind of bind it together? You got to drop the contrast.
Like it could be a product. Like this almost looks like it could be like a statue or something. Like you probably wouldn't want to do that, right? You'd want to show it just as it is. You wouldn't want to go too far into it. So if I'm looking at it from that point, then I'm going to go like, well, some of the detailing could use a little bit more, maybe a little more finesse, like some of the wrinkling and stuff. There's some really cool beats happening that maybe a little more integration of the face, almost like they have it here, because it just becomes like it's a human face with this really cool headdress of an octopus on it.
Yeah, there's some treatment around the neck that would have been nice to see to carry out a little bit stronger or more aggressive throughout the rest of the body, in my opinion. Like
like getting that a little bit more. So it's like you kind of feel like this, like as a designer, like you want those beats to be repeated. You don't want it just to be like just this area and then everything else is like crazy alien.
Right.
But it's really cool. But yeah, like let's say this is going to be a concept for this queen for a movie or something like that. Then there's you might want to do a little photo texture on top of it to sell the texture treatment on it, because it's right in between that cartoony and realistic level, right?
Right.
Which I think it could just use a little push. It's really not the greatest example of what we're talking about, because it's a very nice sculpture. It's just a little more integration, a little bit more design-wise, like tying these things in, like having a little bit more of that purple. Maybe it bleeds into the nose or something like that. And it just feels a little too much like it's a render of a model as opposed to like. But then now I'm reading this over here. It's a real-time character, so you know, scrap everything I said. It's a real-time character. That's very impressive.
So and this is where, you know, it's funny because I still with students and people that I'm mentoring up, if you're doing a real-time character, I still have people put poly count on there, and the reason is that, you know, working at Noman for 10 years, the recruiters would come in 4 times a year, do portfolio review, and you're going to have a recruiter from Blizzard that's been doing this for 22 years. And, you know, most people at most studios don't expect you to put poly count on there anymore on the image. But if there's one at Blizzard that's been there for 22 years and they are looking for poly count and you don't have it posted, then they're looking at somebody else, right? Or just for the fact of what you said, if you put a poly count on there automatically right off the bat, it may be a little odd to see, but you automatically know, like, okay, well, you must be putting poly count because this is for games, or she must be putting poly count because she showed me a game.
Yeah, absolutely. And also show the low poly, show what they're dealing with. You know, I mean, that last one we were looking at had so many images that were very descriptive of the sculpt. But I almost wonder, like, why is it real time? Like, why not just do a nice render of it? Like, but if it's good, if you want to feel like this could work in a game, show me that beautiful thing, but then also show me take all the bells and whistles away and show me, like, look how I made it. Here's my normal maps.
That's my thing too. I you know, with that model, it was a great model. And my thing that as I'm going through looking for modelers and looking for character artists, whether it be for game or film, is that you know, I often wonder how often people are bored or abandon something without pushing it just that little extra bit. You know, if you're, you know, with the last piece that you're just looking at, the way that I felt is it looks a little bit like a 2D piece that you're zoomed in on too much. When you're zoomed in, you can see all the detail you're creating, but then you forget to zoom out. And when you zoom out, there's not enough contrast, and that detail just gets lost, and all that beautiful work that you have on the neck and around that just kind of fades. Now, obviously, for the reason of being the character real time, you're going to lose that. But
but that's I guess that's my thought is also, if it's going to be real time, like, show me that cool, just the beauty pass like they showed, but then also maybe throw it in some different lighting conditions. Show the dynamic lighting on it. Like, hey, you can throw new spotlight. You can do this because it's a real time character now. Which I think is the point of getting to that level, is like that those things can work in so many environments and different, you know, iterations. I'll just do one more because I actually found one I think that ties into what we're talking about better.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
No, thank you for your time.
Yeah, it's fine. I was looking at this one because there's a lot of detail going on this, and there's a lot of you know, the key shot render and the model shot up with the mouth open and all that. But with all that being spent, the sculpture itself, beyond the anatomy, which I think, you could look at this and say we need to work on the anatomy. It's just kind of, he's a giant brute, so of course you get away with some stuff, but you're designing a giant brute, so tie these things together. Right now, I don't really feel like that's bone or concrete or whatever it is. It all becomes just the same thing almost. The growth lines on this looks like just a random alpha kind of thrown on things, and that'll kill your stuff for a pro artist. I think in a meeting you might get away with it, and Lord knows I've had to do it before in a rush.
Right.
But if you're gonna get something, and this looks like it was done for himself or herself, then really spend a little extra time and think of like, okay, so he's Doomsday, he's a monster, he's got skin, bones are growing out of him, and they're turning into these shards, and it's really scary. So let's see the tension of the skin pulling. Let's see if you define that the bones have a certain look, which I think these chin ones probably are the closest to that.
Yeah, that's nice in the sculpt there.
Yeah, and so like carry like the way that they kind of had that growth. Like I kind of feel like, oh, they grew that way. Like they were, if you look at antlers or something like that, they have that feel. But when you get to the back, it just becomes like rocks, I guess. You kind of lose that feeling.
Right.
So try it when you're designing these things, and even if it's reiterating someone else's design, like a Doomsday would. 90% of our job these days is doing that. There's very rarely you go to work on an original character. It's usually this character existed in a comic or a book or a show, and now we got to update them. Right. So give your voice to that. Show why that is. The thick to thin here would have been nice to see in the in this, and the penetrating into the flesh and how it's pulling out. Those kind of things. That's what I'm noticing right off the bat. And then you get into lighting stuff, which is a whole other ball of wax. But you can really, I've seen designs be sold just off of some gray shaded stuff. So but being very clear about those elements. And I think what happens a lot with 3D stuff is you get it to a point that looks pretty refined, and you go, great, let's render it. And you don't necessarily want to do that. You really want to, if you're going to do it in 3D, spend a little bit more time, get it to where it needs to be. Like all this detail, and you get to that ear, and it's like, oh, there's nothing there. It's not even like a malformed ear. It just looks like I kind of didn't want to sculpt an ear because ears are really hard.
Yeah, guilty of that.
Yeah, exactly. So and I get it. I totally get it. But what I would do in that case, I wouldn't show this. I would focus on the cool face. So sometimes just taking a step back and going like, why am I doing this? What is the point of me working on this? I'm working on some fan art myself right now that I'm going to post up soon.
Yeah, and I think it's like skateboarding is fully committing to the drop, right? Hannah's class, she uses Philip Farrow rather than using Ken Abridgman or a heavier anatomy book, because with so many of the students in her class doing game res stuff, there's only a couple games they're doing Uncharted level realism. And,
right.
most people are better off simplifying down to planes and forms that are simplified in Philip Farrow's sculpture than getting into like Rodin, like getting into the heavy muscle. So the point, like you said, is that if you're going to do anatomy, then you got to be committed to take the time to get the anatomy done, whether you get bored with model or just moving on or just don't have that knowledge. You have to commit to it. So if you know that anatomy is a weakness, then just don't show the depth of anatomy and go with simplified forms. If you're going to put an ear in, then you're committed to taking the time to doing a good ear. You can't just fake it. So with everybody we're talking about today, I just want to make this very important, is that your work is good enough to get picked by a pro to even talk about. And so I think that's a great thing. Like, we're here to kind of help you guys along and push you, hopefully to let you get to that next stage. And so if you got a crit today, and you hear this in a recording, we would love to see you update any of the pictures that we talked about, or we can highlight those images as well, or just to see the next work that you work on and maybe give you the opportunity to then pass on your information and come in and do some selections of your own as well.
I sometimes think like going back and revisiting stuff, it's fine, but honestly, you're going to learn more by starting
something new. Yeah.
And bring those ideas into it, because it's easy to, when you do your own work too. Like most everything I have up here is all pro work that I've done for movies and things, and so that means that sometimes there wasn't time to go in and do certain things. But when you're doing your own work, like I do think, take a little time, let it sit for a second. Not everyone needs to see or show work in progress and label it as such. and show us the iteration as it's growing and stuff. But either way, I think you kind of win. But when you just put up something that's like, oh, I did this thing, it's kind of half finished, I gave it a full finish on it, it's almost like you're being apologetic of your own work, or not. I guess not being respectful of your own work, because there will come a time when you're working pro and you don't have the time to go in and do that stuff. So when you get to do your own work, like, show work in progress. I think that's great. I mean, Travis and I met each other back in the days on the CG Talk forums and things. And actually, boy, probably before that, massive. What was the first forums we were talking about back in the day? I can't remember.
Well, back in the day, there used to be like 9 of them, right? And hopefully, hopefully we get back to that, because I do think that it wasn't the success of one, but rather the success of multiple that got people's interests up and got people talking and helping. And I'm really happy for artists like yourself and David and all the artists helping us come in and do this, because I do feel like this is a part of what's been kind of missing. Is you get this at a certain level with Facebook and people are doing YouTube training, but just the simple act of one pro going in, looking at another, or not even a pro. Like, I kind of run away from the term pro nowadays. It's just one talented or passionate or hardworking artist looking at another hardworking artist and saying, hey, here's what I think you need to work on. What do you think I need to work on? As opposed to like, how many followers can I get, or how big is my audience, or just take a look at my stuff. So I think it's cool that we're doing this now. You take time.
Back in the day when we first became friends. This is, God, how many years now? But like we bonded on these things because we were showing our progress, our work in progress, and sometimes our finals, and growing. All of us were kind of growing together back then. Now it becomes more of like a popularity contest, and you're always kind of showing like, well, look what I did, and that's great. I think it's actually really important. Like I very rarely show a lot of work in progress stuff. I think I'm going to start again.
And I feel guilty because one of the posts that I hate the most is when I hear people say, we should start a forum, but it'll only work if we get all the pros. And, when we were doing it back in the day, yes, we were bringing pros in, but it wasn't the fact that it was pros giving advice. It was you, me, Colby Jukes, and, guys that weren't anybody yet on Instant Messenger because we're old. And I can recall sending, working on an image that I was happy with you. It was a conversation with you and a conversation with Dan Dixon from The Matrix. And I remember sending him a model of a head, which I worked on the face. And I'm like, hey, I learned how to do a nose really cool from Ian. And I got this character looks like a boxer. And as soon as I showed it to Dan, Dan goes, wow. He goes, I hope your ears don't look like that. Like, these are the worst looking ears I've ever seen. He's like, can you do me a favor and go look in the mirror? Like, you must be an ugly dude. And that was helpful in the sense of like, man, I knew that I did the ears bad. I knew that I cheated him. I already knew that before I showed it. And I think most artists do know where their weaknesses are and choose to go ahead and post it knowing that there's that flaw. And I think that we need more people coming out with Dan Dixon and be like, dude, your ears suck, right? And maybe not in that way, but if you can build those friendships and get people that are not afraid to say, go work on that, man. Don't be so lazy. Then you grow really, really fast. And if you don't, if you just worry about people liking your work and loving it and sharing it, then you go the opposite direction, right? Yeah,
and you're also not you're not going to grow. You're just going to double down on what you can do well and avoid the rest. And when you're working, that's going to happen, especially in concept. Like, that's going to happen. You're going to have to sometimes, like, your hand might just be a gestural sketch because that's not the point. That's not what you're really trying to sell until it is. And like, I think Travis posted something a while back that was someone like saying like, how great is your portfolio if you don't have some of this? And it was just like a front and back, I think from Carlos Fuente maybe, of like a hand study. And it was just for a creature.
I posted a foot, I think. That foot, I said, would get you a job faster than most people's character design I see. And not in a derogatory way. I'm not putting everybody down, but I'm saying that as a designer, if you're putting something out that isn't that interesting, like a foot, and you can make it look as cool as a bust, then like you're a strong artist, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I like get to the feet and the hands and the this and the that toward the end of designs. So a lot of times, like, they're just clinical images. I don't post them up, but like, it's true. Those are the things that really matter, and that's the stuff you're going to spend most of your time doing. And it's not the sexiest stuff. So when people see it, they might just skim past it. So you want to show your cool, colorful, fun image first. But I think there is really a value in showing that you can handle that kind of work, which is these days. I think there's a lot of people out there who do really glossy, really flashy images in ZBrush and Keyshot. But when you really boil it down and you start looking at it, you go, "There's not much there." There's
what does production mean? You know, what are you going to be doing in production? And Paul's claws, you know, as we know, if you're a creature designer and you don't have, you know, 50 paws and claws, then you're not a creature designer yet. So, but thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. You gave us like an extra 40 minutes, so can't say how cool it is for you to spend time. Thank you so much. Thank you for uploading stuff to CG Society and for the people you picked. Guys, we will record this, post it onto the forum later for people to be able to check out. I'll get in touch with the artists we selected today, and we'll give them the opportunity to come in and do some of this as well on their own time, because I don't just want professionals necessarily. We're really looking at just kind of building everybody into this pattern of getting comfortable critiquing each other and taking a look at work. We do have a session tonight with Alex Manderjiv. Ian, you've worked with him doing some keyframe stuff.
amazing.
Yeah, so he's going to be doing a little bit of a painting tonight and just kind of talk about his work. So if you want to check it out, that's cool. And all week this week, tomorrow we have Terrell coming in. Friday we have Eduardo, who is the visual development art director over at Riot. Next week we have some amazing people too. So if you guys like this is going to be the trend. And we've got about a few months left before the platform upgrade at CG Society. So unfortunately, if you're uploading your art, you're going to have to deal with our old tech. But good news is that will all be upgraded and very, very simple to use, and a nice visual upgrade for the future. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Ian. And anything you wanted to share, Ian? Do you have a website or anything that you want to push?
Yeah, you can check out my website, ianjoyner.com. You can follow my Instagram. That's probably the most up-to-date thing, which I think is just Ian Joyner Art. And that's, if you want to see what I'm up to, that's usually what it. And Avengers is coming out soon. So,
that's right. You work on that, right? Yeah. One last thing before we go, I think it will be a nice treat for a few people because Oscar's actually here today. But right before starting the conversation here, both Ian and I have been noticing Jonathan Hernandez and Oscar Trejo and these names of artists, Cody Williams, that these guys have kind of silently been putting their art out there as junior artists and as students coming up. But they're taking the time to post nice comments and do more than just hit a like button. And professionals like Ian and myself notice that. That's the trend, and that's what we're really doing with all this stuff, is to try to get it back to just being nice to each other and getting better information and fighting some of the contradictory information that's out there. So you guys will get noticed for more than just your art. And your names get remembered when you take the time to help other people out. And I think that has a lot of value to hear.
If I could end it with anything, like, your art's important in terms of getting a job. Your personality is going to be a lot more important. If you're a good person and you're a nice person and you can do solid work, you're going to work a lot more and people are going to want to work with you a lot more than if you're just some egomaniac who does great work and can't have a nice conversation or a decent critique.
And that's honestly the best advice you will ever get for being an artist. So, all right. Thank you, Ian. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. I hope it was useful.
Bye.